Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening I've been asked to give a talk on the subject of the four jhanas. The four jhanas are the result of practicing samatha meditation. In order to understand the jhanas, it's helpful to understand the meaning of samatha. Samatha is the calming of the bodily and mental functions. That calming of the bodily and mental functions, stage by stage, step by step, leads to the jhanas. One can say loosely that it's an automatic process, in that if one is calming, going to ever deeper levels of calmness, one must eventually end up in the jhanas. However, in order to understand these different levels of calmness, it's worthwhile taking one through the various steps which eventually lead to the experience of the jhanas. And of course one has to start way back at the very beginning. I mention this just in case people forget that one cannot expect to attain jhanas unless one's foundation is very secure and very strong. And that foundation, one can say, starts with one's virtue, one's morality. If one's virtue is lacking, then it becomes unlikely that one can enter a jhana. And if one enters it, unlikely one can remain there very strong. Simply, it's like building a house, a very tall house, without strong foundations. It wobbles and falls over very quickly. So in the practice of jhana meditation, one starts with virtue, the keeping of the 5 precepts for a layperson, the keeping of the patimokkha rules for a monk, and as the Buddha said, keeping it to the extent that one sees danger in the slightest fault. Having achieved that purification of sila, then it becomes possible to achieve success in meditation, in samatha. And that link between the virtue and the success in meditation is usually described by the next step after virtue, which is the restraint of the sense faculties. Even in the Buddhist way of speaking, they even call this an aspect of virtue, Indriya Samvara Sila, the sila or the virtue which consists of restraining or guarding the sense faculties. And this restraint is the restraint of the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the bodily touches, and the mind. This restraint, as I read out the other night in the sutta reading, is not getting lost in the delightful or the aversion-producing signs of any sensual object. Any object which you perceive through these 6 senses will have usually an aspect to them which is producive of delight, or an aspect of them producing aversion. Quite often both are there in the object, but the mind chooses one or the other. The predominant aspect of that object. And if one does not, first of all, practice sense restraint, it means that the mind latches on to that which is delightful, or that which is causing aversion. And that will create the craving, will create the attachments, aversion in the mind. If one does not practice sense restraint, you will find that the mind will be turbulent, because it is literally blown to and fro by the six senses. Having been blown to and fro for many hours, for many days, for many weeks, it becomes extremely unlikely that you will be able to settle that mind down when you wish to in formal meditation. Indeed, one can say that the restraint of the six senses is a training in one's daily life, which bears its fruit when one sits quietly in one's meditation posture, watching the breath, or watching one's chosen kammatthana, or meditation object. This is a time where sense restraint really bears fruit. You will see from your experience that if you have not practiced sense restraint, those images of the senses will recur during one's meditation. What one saw in one's daily life, which one attached to, which one delighted in, or which one felt aversion to and created ill will towards, will find those objects quite often recurring and hindering one from attaining the result of tranquility, which is peace, which is eventually the jhanas. So realizing the importance of sense restraint, one practices that diligently as a foundation for the practice which eventuates in jhana. And one can also understand that sense restraint is a practice of samatha, samatha being the tranquilizing, the calming of whatever. Here, by practicing sense restraint, you are calming the six senses. Having practiced sense restraint, the next preliminary foundation for the arising of jhanas is the establishment of mindfulness and clear comprehension. It's interesting in this gradual path that mindfulness and clear comprehension are not established at the beginning of the gradual training, but they are established here after sense restraint, which shows that the mindfulness and clear comprehension referred to by the Buddha is something quite profound, something which is taking that calming of the mind a little bit further than sense restraint. Indeed, when the senses are not restrained, that which we may call mindfulness or clear comprehension is only partial. It's only 50% or less or a little bit more, but it's not the full mindfulness and comprehension which is required as a preliminary for samatha meditation. The mindfulness is the function of the mind which clearly knows the content of consciousness. The clear comprehension of sampajanya is that wisdom faculty of the mind which knows what to do with that conscious experience. It knows its suitability, it knows its purpose, and so on. This is the function of the mind we call sampajanya, or clear comprehension. These two have to be established quite clearly, quite pronounced, before jhana can occur. And having established sati and sampajanya, the next stage is the abandonment of the 5 hindrances. Those 5 hindrances, once again, are kama chanda, or sometimes its synonym, abhijja. This is that movement of the mind which seeks delight in the 5 senses. The sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of smell, touch or taste. It is that which seeks delight in the 5 senses. Be careful here that the hindrance, this first hindrance, only concerns those external 5 senses. That which seeks delight in the 6th sense, the mind, is quite an important help for the attainment of jhanas, because the attainment of jhanas is very much the delight in the mind, and one has to encourage that which seeks delight in the mind rather than delight externally in the 5 senses in order to achieve these jhana states. So be clear that first hindrance is not, as some people loosely translate, desire, or not as some people loosely translate sensual desire. It is the sensual desire of the 5 senses, and in particular that movement of the mind which seeks pleasure in sights, sounds, tastes, touches and smells. The second hindrance is vyapada, which is ill will. Ill will is not the same as aversion. Aversion is turning away from unskillful objects of the mind. Ill will is more than that. It's contemplating the hurt, especially directed to a being. Here, ill will has to be abandoned as the second hindrance. The third hindrance is tina mida, which is the sluggishness of the mind. It is the tiredness of the body. It is that which we usually call dullness or sleepiness. That too has to be abandoned before we can hope to attain a jhana. The fourth hindrance is one of the major obstacles to the attainment of jhana. It is called uddhacca and kukkacca, which is restlessness and remorse. I prefer the term remorse rather than worry, because the term kukkacca is usually referred to the result of unskillful actions of body, speech or mind in the past. It is remorse which builds up because of unskillful karma done by you, of a misdeed, of breaking one's precepts, of saying, doing or thinking that which you should not have done. That remorse, that kukkacca, should be abandoned by those people who are very meticulous in keeping sila, in keeping the rules of the Vinaya, and keeping the rules of the monastery, and keeping general good behavior. But uddhacca, the restlessness of the mind, is something which is harder to abandon. This is that which keeps pushing and pulling the mind around, which prevents it from staying still and remaining in one place. Uddhacca is a habit of the mind. That habit of the mind can often be motivated by the first 2 hindrances, either sensual desire, in other words, in the search for pleasure through the 5 senses, the mind moves first this way and that way, and is restless, or through ill will and seeking ways to exhibit that ill will, the mind moves backwards and forwards. These are two of the greatest sources of uddhacca, of restlessness. And the fifth hindrance is doubt. In particular here, it refers to the doubt about the path towards jhana, what one should be doing, where one is in this gradual training towards jhana, what one should do next, whether what one is experiencing is jhana or not, how close or whatever. These doubts which keep asking questions of yourself during the meditation, which seek to know whether this is right, this is wrong, whether you should be doing this or should be doing that, this is doubt. And it is another cause for restlessness, something which disturbs the mind and stops it achieving full jhana. The way these hindrances are overcome is through choosing a kammatthana, choosing a meditation object. The choosing of a meditation object has to be done according. The choosing of a meditation object has to be done according to one's personal traits, personal characteristics. The meditation object you use will not always be as successful to another person. However, here I wish to point out the meditation object of the breath, because this is the most common way which monks use to enter jhana. And by understanding the overcoming of the five hindrances and the arising of the jhana factors through the practice of anapanasati, or mindfulness of the breath, you should be able to understand the arising of the jhana factors using any other kammatthana, or meditation object. Again, having practiced virtue, having practiced sense restraint, having established sati and sampajanya, mindfulness and clear awareness, then one chooses one's meditation object, chooses the breathing. One thing which I was always impressed with was the little amount of information which the Buddha gave in the suttas concerning meditation, concerning the arousing of jhanas. Most people look for instruction for jhana meditation in the commentaries. And I always remember that saying of the Buddha. I think it occurs in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. So it is a saying said by the Buddha at the very end of his life, saying that the teachings which he had given and which he had laid down and were remembered by Venerable Ananda were completely sufficient for every aspect of the training, for every aspect of the path, that he did not leave anything out which was necessary. And when I read that, then I started to look at not what the commentaries said about samatha meditation or the arising of jhana, but what the sutta said, what the Buddha said, and seeing how much one could gather from the Buddha's words. And if one looks at the Buddha's words, his instructions for a monk who is using the breath, his instructions which would give rise to jhana, are contained in his description of the stages of anapanasati, of mindfulness of the breathing. And everyone should know that that first stage is just as one is breathing in or breathing out, to know whether it's a long breath or a short breath. And this meticulous, methodical approach to breath meditation is the most useful, is the most productive of attaining jhanas. In my own experience, I have found that when one approaches breath meditation unmethodically, skipping stages, skipping steps, doing it this way and that way, that one's meditation is rarely very effective. Sometimes you hit on the right thing by chance and achieve success. Most often you do not. The methodical approach, the step-by-step approach as the Buddha taught it, is the one which I really recommend. So one starts just knowing a long breath or a short breath as one breathes in or as one breathes out. This is just getting hold of the breath, catching hold of it. From that one proceeds to the stage where one can clearly be aware of the whole breath. In the Anapanasati Sutta, it says the body of the breath. And this is quite clearly meant to refer to the in-breath from the time it occurs all the way through till the end, the fading away of the in-breath. The out-breath from its beginning right through without interruption to the very end of an in-breath. Seeing each in-breath, seeing each out-breath clearly without interruption. This is that second stage. I like to call it the fully capturing your kammatthana, having it clearly in your mind. Because unless the meditation object is clearly in your mind, you have nothing to calm. You have to capture your prey before you can train it. And so, once one has the meditation object clearly in mind without interruption, not just for a single breath, but for many breaths, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, until one can be certain that that degree of restlessness which allows the mind to lose the meditation object and go off onto other trains of thought in the past or the future, that restlessness of the mind is abandoned, and you can very easily just watch the whole breath from beginning to end, breath after another, one breath after another. Only once you've reached that stage to start the fourth stage in the Anapanasati Sutta, which is to calm that breath, to calm the meditation object. Sometimes at the beginning of breath meditation, you have to exert some force. You have to arouse chanda and virya, that which looks for, searches for, leaps towards the meditation object, and the virya, the energy thus resulting, which keeps the mind on the object. These two things can be looked on as supplying two of the jhana factors in a very coarse form. Those two jhana factors are called vitakka and vichara. The translations or renderings of those two terms by different authors is very different. From my experience, that it's quite clear that what vitakka and vichara mean in the realm or in the area of jhana meditation is that movement of the mind which pushes the attention onto the object, which inclines the attention to your chosen object. and vichara is that function of the mind which keeps it there. It's inappropriate to call that initial and sustained thought. It's much closer, much more accurate to call it initial application and sustained application. But again, you may know this as that movement of the mind which pushes or inclines or nudges or urges the attention onto the object chosen, and vichara as that function of the mind which holds the attention there, keeps it there, sticks it there. And these two factors are started to be cultivated even at this stage, to be able to maintain one's attention on the whole breath from the very beginning to its end, from the very beginning of the next breath to its end, requires this function of the mind, of vitakka and vichara. The initial, or the pushing the mind onto the object and holding it there. You'll find that even at this stage, the mind not being settled will be liable to having other objects arise, such as thoughts, such as sounds, such as feelings outside of the breath. And that is why the vitakka and vichara are required here. As soon as the attention moves away, that which is vitakka pushes it back again, and vichara holds it there. And at the same time, when one is developing this ability to nudge the mind onto its object and to keep it there, one calms the breath. Calming the breath is achieved sometimes by just mere suggestion. You may call it an adhitthana. It is a suggestion of will to the mind to have the breath being calm. It can also just happen quite naturally, being that the longer one watches the whole breath, the mind quite naturally will become calm, and that will produce a smoother, calmer breath. At this stage in the meditation, once the breath starts to go to a certain degree of calmness, the mental image of the breath will appear to the mind. This mental image of the breath is very hard to describe because it appears to different people in different guises. It is just a perception in the mind relating to the physical feeling of the breath. To some it might occur as a light in different forms, an imaginary light in the mind. To some it can still just be a feeling, but not so much a physical feeling as a mental feeling. To some it might be able to locate that at a particular part of the body. Quite naturally, where one locates it is nearly always at the tip of the nose, somewhere, just at the tip of the nose, just above or just below. To some, one doesn't even locate it anywhere in the body. Being a mental object, it can just appear in the mind with no particular location on your physical body. But whatever it is, this will arise naturally once the breathing becomes sufficiently calm. It's as if that mental object was always there, but the grosser physical feelings hide it and cover it, so the mind is unable to notice it and perceive it clearly. Once that mental object appears, the mind quite naturally will want to be with that. Here one has to resolve a very important doubt which might arise in the mind. And that doubt appeared to me as, what should I follow? Should I follow the breath or should I follow the mental object? That doubt can be resolved by noticing with the faculty of wisdom that the mental object is indeed no different than the breathing. The mental object is just an aspect of the breath, just like the colour red is the aspect of an apple. If one is watching an apple for long enough, with a quiet mind, with an attentive mind, there are certain features of that apple will disappear and others will become more prominent. It may be that the shape of the apple disappears, its smell disappears, and all one sees in one's mind is the redness, and that becomes a prominent feature which one perceives. In much the same way as the breath is going in and out, as it becomes calm, a prominent feature, the mental image of the breath, occurs. Allow the attention to stay with the mental image. The mental image is the gateway into jhanas. As one of the Buddhist texts says, and I cannot remember which, that a meditator who does not know the difference between the in-breath, the out-breath, and the mental image will never attain to jhana. Once that mental image is there, it takes an even more refined degree of vitakka and vichara to keep the attention on that mental image. This is a more refined state of mind, and so one needs more refined tools to keep the attention there. That nudging of the mind onto the mental image and the maintaining of the mind on that mental image is very important here. Again, these are functions of your mind. If you can notice them, that these are two different functions of the mind, that which nudges the mind once it moves off a little back onto the object is called vitakka. Once it's on the object, that which maintains it there, which keeps it stuck there, which holds it there, is called vichara. As one develops these two faculties and one achieves some success at keeping the mental image constantly in front of one, the factors of joy and happiness appear quite naturally in the mind. These are the factors called piti and sukha. Much has been said about what each one means. Piti and sukha. The best definition does come from the commentaries, where it gives the simile of a man walking through the desert and from a distance seeing a body of water. Seeing the body of water from a distance, one gets the piti, one gets the mental rapture, and only after drinking that water, bathing, and resting under the shade of a tree by that lake does one experience the sukha. The sukha being like the ease of the body, the happiness which arises from the release of some affliction or whatever. In that simile, it is the release of the affliction of thirst and heat. The sukha which arises in this meditation and the piti which precedes it arises because of the release of the affliction of the 5 hindrances. Indeed, this practice, this process of methodically arousing the mental image and developing that which we call vitakka and vichara, to keep nudging the mind onto that image and maintaining the awareness there, can be said to be that which opposes and overcomes the grosser forms of the 5 hindrances and also the more subtle forms of those 5 hindrances. And piti sukha arises as a result. The piti sukha, even though I did mention there's a difference between them, one does not need to try at this stage to separate the two. Because at this stage in the meditation, piti and sukha are so close together, they're so intertwined, that it becomes very difficult for the meditator to really know which one is which. Even in the second jhana, it's very difficult to know which one is which. It's only in the experience of the third jhana, when half of these two twins, which look almost identical, disappears, the piti drops away, and all that is left is sukha, that one really understands what is meant by sukha in the context of jhana. Quite truly, it's only those meditators who experience the third jhana will know the difference between piti and sukha. So at this stage it is helpful just to regard piti sukha as a pair so close together that one might just regard this as one thing. And this piti sukha arises at this stage as a result of the overcoming of the affliction of the five hindrances. In particular, it is the overcoming of the hindrance which is the search for pleasure through the five senses. This search for pleasure through the five senses is a great affliction which we do not notice because we've been doing this all of the time. But the first time that the mind is free from this burden, from this tyranny of seeking for sensual pleasure through the five senses, the mind feels this amazing sense of inner peace, inner happiness, this inner piti sukha. It appears to the meditator as a very joyful state arising once the mind or once the attention manages to stay with the mental object for long enough. Now once that piti sukha starts to arise, one has to develop it. As the fifth and sixth stages in the Anapanasati suggest, a monk breathes in and breathes out, developing piti and developing sukha. Thus he trains himself. Actually, the words in the sutta are, as he breathes in, the words in the sutta, if I remember them correctly, he says, I will breathe in experiencing piti, I will breathe out experiencing piti. Thus he trains himself. I'll breathe in experiencing piti, I'll breathe out experiencing piti. Thus he trains himself. I'll breathe in and breathe out experiencing sukha. Thus he trains himself. So one can understand here that one actually develops this piti and this sukha. One does that in the mind which makes it grow, which makes it become established. And at the beginning, that which makes it established, that which makes it grow, is just the action of vitakka and vichara on the meditation, on the mental object, on the mental image. That gives rise to piti and sukha. Another useful way of looking at it is that which keeps the attention on the mental object is also that which creates samatha, peace, tranquility in the mind. That vitakka and vichara is overcoming the opposite of tranquility, which is the restlessness, the moving away from the mental image onto something else, the swinging of the monkey away from the branch. So this is a more refined process of tranquilizing, calming, which we call samatha. So as we apply our attention onto that mental image, as we maintain that attention on that image, that piti, sukha arise in the mind and grow and stabilize. At this particular stage, the piti and sukha become the main objects of one's attention. Just as when watching an apple, maybe the redness will disappear and the beautiful smell of it will become the most predominant characteristic of the apple. In this particular time, the piti and sukha become the most prominent object in the mind. And again, that piti sukha is a very joyful but peaceful feeling in the mind. When that piti sukha becomes firmly established in the mind, when it is stable, one can call that the experience of first jhana. The stability of this state is what I understand is meant by ekagata, gone to oneness. Gone to oneness, not in the sense of gone to a particular place, but a mind which is settled on one thing and which does not move away from it. Just as in the Buddha's simile of a monkey swinging from branch to branch, when the monkey, instead of swinging from branch to branch, stays on one branch, then one can say that he's gone to one branch. When the mind is settled on one object, in other words, that object is maintained from moment to moment to moment, over many seconds, over many minutes, sometimes over many hours. It is called ekagata, gone to oneness. Gone to oneness in time rather than gone to oneness in space. But even so, that sometimes for those who still have the mental image appearing as being located somewhere in their body, usually at the bottom of their nose, even then there is also the experience of spatial gone to oneness, being that all the attention has gone to one point, one physical point. So the gone to oneness is primarily a gone to oneness in time, a sustained attention which doesn't move from moment to moment to moment to moment. Although the gone to oneness can have this secondary meaning of gone to oneness in space. But that gone to oneness is not the primary factor of one's attention. One's attention, the primary factor is this piti sukha, this experience of joy and bliss, which is maintained from moment to moment to moment to moment, the stable experience. Now sometimes the arising of this stable piti sukha can occur quite fast. It can occur as a whooshing in of the mind, a falling in to somewhere, or it can occur gradually and gently. As it is occurring, there are two great obstacles which one should be aware of and remember. That first obstacle is called fear. The concentrated, peaceful, blissful state of mind, which we call jhana, sometimes arouses in the mind fear, as if that this is something too huge and powerful and awesome for one to handle. That fear or awe about what is about to happen, or what actually is happening, can unsettle the mind and can take the mind away from that mental object and stop one entering fully the experience of jhana. That fear is only overcome through experience, through going step by step nearer and nearer to the experience of jhana, and realizing through one's own experience that this is a very powerful state, but a very comfortable state, a very joyful state, where there is nothing to fear at all. And when one can overcome that fear, then one can enter the state and enjoy the benefits from that state. The other difficulty or other problem is not fear, but exuberation, the feeling of, oh, wow, at last, here it is. Again, that movement of the mind, that exhilaration, that feeling of great success will take the mind away from the experience of jhana. The only way to enter this jhana is with this calm, cool mind, where one doesn't interrupt the flow which is tending towards jhana. One doesn't interrupt or say anything or do anything, but one just continues in this inclining of the mind into the mental object, into that which is piti and sukha. Once that piti and sukha is clearly established in the mind, it becomes the main object of first jhana. And it becomes that which holds the mind in first jhana. The mind is satisfied, the mind is content with that peaceful and blissful experience. Now, because perception is based on one's past karma, it is built up of one's past experiences. You may describe this piti and sukha in different ways to yourself. This piti and sukha is a peaceful experience, but very joyful. It's not so much overwhelming, because overwhelming is more this feeling of exhilaration which takes you away from the object. It is more fulfilling, satisfying, arising contentment. In other words, it is a feeling which can sustain itself. The fact that the mind has found this inner contentment, this inner peace, this inner satisfaction, this inner piti sukha, means that one can maintain the awareness there quite comfortably. Even though I say this, that one can maintain the experience quite comfortably, that vitakka and vichara still is operating. That which nudges the attention onto the object, that which maintains it there, is still operating. Only this is the most refined type of vitakka and vichara that exists. The most refined nudging, the most refined maintaining of the attention on piti sukha, that which is peaceful, that which is joyful in the mind. Again, this piti sukha arises because something has been abandoned. This piti sukha is a joy of release. That's why it can first appear as peace, and it can later be developed as happiness. Again, because vitakka and vichara are still operating here, there is still a nudging of the mind, there's still an effort to keep the mind on the mental object, on the piti sukha. Even though this is extremely refined, it is not called full samadhi yet. Full samadhi, or full one-pointedness of mind, is only achieved once this vitakka and vichara are no longer necessary. And if one looks at the suttas, that there is in at least one place, if not two, a sort of between stage between the first and second jhana, where vitakka is no longer necessary. the piti sukha which is in the mind is well enough established that one does not need to nudge onto that object anymore. There is just the piti sukha there, but there is still that function of the mind which maintains the awareness there, necessary. And this is a sort of between stage, which is mentioned sometimes in the suttas. Often it is not mentioned at all, because once the vitaka is not necessarily, very soon afterwards the vichara isn't either. And the piti sukha becomes fully established in the mind, that joyful happiness born of samadhi, of the mind which truly has come to one point. The way one will perceive these two states again depends upon one's past experience. These are the terms which one picks out from one's experience to describe these states. The experience is the same, but the words one uses to label them can be different. In this particular state, the first jhana is a mind which is almost solid, but is just a little bit wobbly on the edges. A piti sukha which is, if you like, vibrating, or if you like, a piti sukha which is a ball with hairs on it, just not quite smooth on the outside, not quite solid, but its edges tend to smooth over into what's adjacent to it. But when one achieves second jhana, the mind is like a solid, hard ball with no edges to it at all. The piti sukha is firmly established in the mind, and is so firmly established that it has a different flavour to it, a different experience to it, a much more refined piti sukha than was there before. And this piti sukha is that piti sukha born of concentration. Here the mind being solid, the mind not moving, just this one object, one mental object, from moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, not changing in any aspect whatsoever, just a constant state of consciousness where nothing is moving. Because nothing is moving, there is no vitaka and vichara there. Just the experience of still happiness and bliss. From that, the piti sukha, as it were, divides, as if the twins move apart, and the rough part of piti sukha, the disturbing part, which one never knew was disturbing before, falls away. And as it falls away, one is left just with the feeling of happiness, with equanimity. This feeling of happiness with equanimity being the twofold object of the third jhana. In this experience, again, the deeper one goes, the more refined it is and the harder it is to talk about it. You ask the meditator afterwards, what was it like? And one can just say it was just happiness and equanimity for a long time. A more peaceful, a more quieter, a more tranquil form than was there before. That's why it is this process of samatha, of quietening, 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 calming, 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 going on at each particular stage. And then that happiness, that's why they call it the happy state praised by the Aryans. The happiness itself gives way, and all one is left with is equanimity, equanimity and pure mindfulness. Sometimes one can ask, is this one state or two states? But it's just one state, just with two aspects. Just depends on which you want to look at it from. Just pure equanimity, pure mindfulness in the state of the fourth jhana. And again, a mind which is solid at this point. Now here, this becomes the object of consciousness. It is a mental object, not a physical object. It's an aramana. It's an object of the mind sense, not an object of sight, not an object of sound, not an object of taste, smell or touch. It's an object of mind. Once one knows what these objects of mind is, what these objects of mind are, not based on the other five senses, one gets a good understanding of what we mean by these mental objects. And this becomes the achievement of fourth jhana, just pure equanimity, pure mindfulness, as the object of consciousness, of the mind consciousness, from moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, without any break, without any interval. And the deeper one goes into calm, usually the longer one can stay there. The more calm a thing is, the more it takes for it to be moved. It's as if one is applying stronger and stronger brakes onto the mind, and in fourth jhana, just all the brakes are solidly on, locked. The mind isn't moving at all, and it takes a lot to move that mind. That which eventually moves the mind in each of these states, you may call it the karma which was there before. I like to describe it as the momentum with which one entered that jhana. If one entered it with a lot of momentum, with a lot of energy, not disturbing energy, but the energy of samatha, then one stays for long periods. If the samatha is built on a solid foundation from where that energy can arise, the jhanas will last for long. And again, the deeper the jhana, the longer one will stay. And that will often be despite any wish or desire, because certainly in the second jhana, there's no wish or desire can ever enter the mind whatsoever. Even in first jhana, it's very hard, but certainly in second, third, and fourth, that no intention can really be made within that state. The mind is solid, it's fixed on its mental object. Once an intention arises, one has lost the jhana. And these become the experience of the jhanas, successively more peaceful, more profound, more silent states of mind. The Buddha was saying that what you are doing here is calming the body, the inner speech, and the mind. You're working with feeling and perception, those two khandhas, and you're calming them, refining them more and more and more. And this calming, this pacifying, this settling is what gives rise to the jhanas. And the result of the jhanas is the happy abiding. The Buddha said there's 4 types of practice: the happy and the fast, the happy and the slow, the difficult and the fast, and the difficult and the slow. The happy practice, fast and slow, is that which depends on jhanas. This is the happy abiding for a monk. And if a monk does not have experience of those jhanas, he will find himself looking for pleasures eventually in other areas, and especially in the five senses. The result of a jhana is that the mind is so satisfied and fulfilled, for a long time afterwards the hindrances are completely still. The mind is satisfied, it's had its fill, and so it does not wish, it does not move towards looking for sensual delights. And it is so content that it is impossible to gain ill will. The mind is bright, it's had energy, and so the third hindrance of tina middha just doesn't come up. And the stillness in jhana persists afterwards, and so the uddhacca kukkacca, the restlessness of the mind, will not come up. The kukkacca will not come up because there's not the slightest bit of remorse. One knows that one has achieved a very profound state, and one has joy, not remorse. And the doubt is not there. One has experienced something which one has read about in the suttas. One has experienced that which the Buddha and the disciples had experienced. And one knows clearly that one has. And this abandons and destroys that doubt about the path of meditation. And so the result is a happy abiding, a clear abiding, an abiding in which the five hindrances are dispersed for a long time until the effect of that jhana eventually wears off. And that is why that this is a marvelous opportunity on the emergence from a jhana to turn the mind to the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, or to turn the mind onto the Four Noble Truths, or to turn the mind on observing the five khandhas, or the six sense bases, or even turning the mind back onto the jhana factors. And this is the opportunity where one gains the powerful insights. One has gained these powerful insights because one has had, or one has developed, the powerful mind. So this is the description of the four jhanas. If you can remember that these four jhanas are established by first establishing virtue, and then by sense restraint, and then by sati and sampajanya, mindfulness and clear awareness, and then by taking the meditation object and developing it in the way described by the Buddha, capturing the meditation object and so till the whole object is clearly in front of you, and then calming it until the kammatthana gives way to its corresponding mental image, and then by nudging the mind onto that mental image, by keeping it there using vitakka and vichara, maintaining the attention on that image until the piti sukha emerges, and watching the attention take that as its object, the piti sukha, developing it, absorbing into it, creating the factors of the first jhana. And as that first jhana settles down, to see it settle down and go into the second jhana, maybe the third, and even the fourth. The gradual process of calming the mind into deeper and deeper levels of peace. So that ends this talk on jhanas. I'm sure there may be some things which one either hasn't understood or which one disagrees with, because when one describes the states of mind, they are extremely difficult to put into words. But hopefully that I have explained some of their major characteristics clearly enough, both to give one a sense of direction and also to enable one to recognize these states as they occur, and to recognize the states which certainly are not jhanas, because quite often it seems that people maintain that a particular experience is a jhana when it is not. And so it is good to know the description so one can know the experience. And lastly, hopefully, that just the mention and the description of these states will encourage in each one of us the aspiration to achieve that which other monks, that which the Buddha experienced, so that we can put forth the effort depending on that aspiration and find that we too can experience a jhana. Now, has anyone got any questions or comments about the talk?
At the beginning of anapanasati practice, is it possible to separate vitaka and vichara?
The question is, at the beginning of anapanasati practice, is it possible to separate vitaka and vichara? In my experience, yes. Again, it depends upon the clarity of one's mind. One can, by repeated examination, repeated observing of that which keeps the mind on the object, distinguish two different functions of the mind. That function which pushes the mind onto the object, and that function which holds it on. You're asking that, is it possible to be able to maintain the awareness on the mental object without vitaka constantly being present there? You're saying that you can maintain, or can you maintain one's attention on the mental object without pushing it onto it? There are a couple of points there, that once the attention is reasonably on the mental object, and there's a little bit of peace there because the mind isn't moving too far away, it can maybe compared to the monkey who's just holding on to one branch but is still swinging a little. The vitaka and vichara should be noticed in this state and applied or encouraged in order to get closer into that mental object. Again, it is a case where one is being satisfied too quickly, too easily. One should apply a bit of vitaka which pushes the mind deeper in to the object, and the vichara which, when you get deeper in, to hold it deeper in. And you will find then that that which is just mere peace starts to expand and even explode into great joy and happiness.
It seems at that point, if pity doesn't arise naturally or spontaneously, it seems that there's this kind of anticipation. It's like a subliminal anticipation of wanting.
Okay. You're asking that once the mental object is pretty clearly in front of one's mind, and one has a feeling of peace, that sometimes the desire for piti sukha can be very strong and act like an anticipation which destroys the quiet of the meditation. Again, this needs to be cured, needs a very refined type of mind, which allows the previous intention to get jhana to work to its fulfillment. And so the anticipation or the desire is not so much for the goal as for that which causes the goal to arise. So one aspires to make the mind peaceful. One aspires to create the causes. And one works to create the causes rather than put one's attention on the goal. Very similar to going on a journey, and instead of thinking of the step you're taking now, just looking way over there for the goal and wondering, when am I going to reach it? So it is putting the attention fully on the cause. At this particular stage, the cause is applying that vitaka and vichara, to create the samatha or the effect of samatha. And you'll notice that when the mind looks at peace, when Vitakka Vichara holds peace closer and closer and closer, it begins to realize that this peace is or has the factors of piti sukha embedded in it. Like peace, if you like, is that feeling of peace is the forerunner of the piti sukha, and the piti sukha is just under the surface of that, because the peace is the sign of freedom from the disturbance, and the piti sukha is the appreciation of that freedom. Well, yes. At each point in these meditations, one needs to have the faculty of wisdom very strong. And that's why that the Buddha once said that anapanasati, or the meditation on the breath, is really suitable for those who've got very strong wisdom. Because at each stage, as either the physical object of the breath, and especially the mental object of the breath, starts to appear, the mind needs to be very wise in order to follow this and to know how to calm it even further, how to be aware of it and what to do with it. And at each stage one develops this wisdom, and the wisdom is mostly developed by seeing what happens with what one does, and by noticing especially these different functions of the mind, like vitakka, like vichara.
Is it possible for piti sukha to arise on the physical breath, or does it have to be the mental breath?
You're asking, is it possible for piti sukha to arise on the physical breath, or does it have to arise on the mental image of the breath? The piti sukha which arises or can arise on the physical breath is of a different order than the piti sukha which arises on the mental image. One is coarse, the other is refined. They may have similar characteristics, but once one has much experience of the piti sukha of just the physical plane, and one has enough experience of the piti sukha of, if you like, the mental plane, around the mental objects, one can differentiate their differences and really appreciate for oneself why we say that the piti sukha in jhana is much more refined, much purer, and in the sense of a completely different and higher quality. There's some aspect of it which is the same, but there's another aspect of it which is much, much different. That aspect of it which is the same is the ability to delight the mind. You're questioning, is it possible to enter jhana through attention on the physical breath alone? In brief, no, it's not. I can imagine, though, that a person who is watching the physical breath alone has an experience, especially that maybe one of these experiences of whooshing inwards, of quick concentration, where the mental image comes up very quickly, the piti sukha gets very strong, and in a very short time the mind tends to fall in and stay in that piti sukha, which is a mental image. It is unlikely, but I can imagine the process happening. Does that answer your question?
So it's more or less impossible.
I wouldn't say it's impossible, I would say it's unlikely. Especially for a person who is beginning meditation, who doesn't have much experience of what we mean by a mental object or mental image. They may even mistake the mental image as being a physical feeling, because the mental image is a very refined thing, and the perception, if it is not very well informed, may not know how to understand it and just think of it as a physical feeling. I can imagine that happening. But with more experience, one will know, or one will be able to distinguish that this is indeed a mental image, and this mental image is one of the doorways, or the main doorway, into jhana. I've heard that it is possible for some very experienced meditators to bypass the preliminary stages and to arouse that mental image almost at will. And once one knows that mental image well enough, that I can imagine it is possible to arouse that mental image at will and to enter jhana extremely quickly. Just by arousing that mental image, and the piti sukha around that will also rise very quickly and draw the attention in almost immediately. Are there any more questions on this subject? I will maybe mention just one last thing here, that when talking of many jhanas, it does miss an important point, and that is that one should have the aspiration to attain first jhana, first of all, and to know that very well, first of all, and to have skill in entering that, first of all, and then from there to develop the second jhanas. And then when one has full experience of the second jhana, one knows it well, and one knows the way in and the way out, then to develop the third jhana, and so forth. Again, this methodical practice in Buddhism is the quickest way, and that methodical practice does not start with entering jhana. It starts right back with virtue, with sense restraint, with sati sampajanya, with the banning of the hindrances, with watching whether a breath is long or short, with watching a whole breath, with arousing the mental image, with sustaining the awareness on that mental image, with the arousing of piti sukha. At each stage, be fully methodical and make sure that you have the preliminary stage conquered, well known, before you proceed to a further stage. It may happen sometimes that through your skill, through the causes which give rise to these states, that you are able just to go very deep in your meditation. That is fine. Enjoy that, learn from it, but don't make that a habit of always expecting that to occur. As far as the jhanas are concerned, really make the first jhana well known, and then the second jhana, and then the third jhana.